Welcome, Tony Soll, resident of Brooklyn Heights, musician, former history and English teacher, and we're so excited to talk to you today, Tony.
Thank you.
So, you were just telling me that you were originally born in England.
Yes, I was born in England. I came here in 1957 as a 10-year-old. My dad was a British Army officer who was liaison with an American unit. And then he got into advertising and he had to come to New York eventually for advertising.
What eventually led you to Brooklyn Heights?
What led us to Brooklyn Heights? Let's see. We had 2 kids, and the kids needed separate bedrooms. And lo and behold, Sarah had a friend, she had a student who lived over here at 101 Clark Street. So we got on the waiting list, and lo and behold, qualified after a few months to a 3-bedroom apartment, which we still have. And that's how we ended up in Brooklyn Heights.
What was your impression of the neighborhood then?
It's much renovated since then. I mean, all these tall buildings. Our building at Clark Street was, I gather, an early high-rise. It's 31 stories in the area, and was much not appreciated by the people who lived in brownstones in the tree-lined streets of Brooklyn Heights. Now, of course, all over the place, there are high-rises much higher and rising than what we have.
I want to talk a little bit more about your music.
Sure.
So, take us back to, was it the 60s or 70s that you were getting involved in the blues scene?
60, well, that's a good question. Really, a little bit in the 60s, but early 70s.
Okay.
I was working in publishing and book production.
Yeah.
And so one day somebody said, hey, there's a guy here who also plays the guitar. Come over, and I meet a guy named Bill Dicey.
And where was this? What's the location?
This was in Manhattan.
Okay.
This was at
some club or something?
No, this was at work, Crown Publishers.
Oh.
Yeah, and in fact, it was a printing salesman.
Okay.
And so I meet this guy, Bill, who was a decade or so older than me. And I would say also this was a very conservative industry at the time. I had hair down to here and never wore a tie. So everybody knew who I was, because I was the quote-unquote hippie at Crown, even though I didn't think of myself ever as a hippie. So anyway, I get introduced to this guy, Bill, who quote-unquote also plays the guitar. And it turns out that he was a Southern white guy who played the blues, and he said, oh, do you want to come over one day and we'll do some playing? And I said, sure. And he lived in Connecticut, in Byram, Connecticut, which was a drive from here. And so I went out there and played a bit of guitar and a bit of bass. And he said, you know, I don't have a bass player for next week. Do you want to do a gig? And I said, well, I don't know the tunes. He said, well, I'll tell you the keys, which is what happens in blues. And I ended up playing with him, and then he turned out to be way more professional than me and introduced me to the blues singer John Hammond. And I went on a tour with them, having never played professionally, really, other than a couple of times.
Were you nervous doing that?
I was beyond nervous.
Yeah.
And so, you know, lo and behold, I quit publishing, got on a plane, went to Denver. And,
so where did you tell your wife, oh, hey, listen, quit your job.
Yeah, I mean,
I'm hitting the road.
That's basically it, you know, and it was a short-lived thing. It was a short tour.
What did she say?
She said, cool, you know.
I love her.
When I came back to New York, I had another friend from college who was getting successful as a session singer and songwriter. So I did a bunch of gigs with him, and through him, met the Neville Brothers.
Mm-hmm.
And so I ended up playing with them on and off, which was an amazing graduate school of music experience. And they were extremely tolerant. They were all working kind of part-time in different jobs, even construction, not doing what they became famous later. But I was immersed in these real New Orleans guys doing real New Orleans music. They even made me sing with them, because you doubled, you know. I'll never forget when Aaron Neville said, no, I want you singing on Tell It Like It Is, just double Charles, you know.
Wait, you sang on Tell It Like It Is?
Yeah, not on the record, but at gigs.
Okay, okay,
Yeah.
that's pretty incredible.
It was pretty incredible. I mean, I remember it to this day.
Wow.
My wife used to lend Aaron earrings. They all
Really?
had pierced ears. We still have a set of earrings that Aaron wore.
Wow.
And it was fantastic, you know. But basically, yeah, and that went on. And then I sort of needed a full-time job at that point to be a responsible middle-class kid. I really didn't want a job in publishing. And then my wife, who was a natural-born teacher, was a teacher at a little preschool. She said, well, why don't you go up and talk to Elspeth? Elspeth was one of the advisors. And Elspeth, after talking to me for ages, like an hour and a half, 2 hours in her office, said, well, when do you want to start in graduate school? And I said, well, don't I have to apply and have an interview? She said, well, you just had the interview.
Yeah,
Here's the
the
form.
interview's done, yeah.
And so I said, yeah, let's go for it. You know, and I'm not that impulsive, even though, you know.
Sounds like, I mean, you hit the road.
And yeah, well,
you quit your job and hit the road. That's pretty impulsive.
I'm sort of
Tony.
conservatively impulsive, not politically conservative. Please write that down. And so then I went to Bank Street, and got hired as a teacher at the graduate school. It was a school for children that trained teachers on the job. Again, and that was its ethos. Even now, still as a graduate school, there's a school for children there, progressive school, and it really is this sort of inspiration for a lot of the schools around here. A lot of the teachers at Brooklyn Friends and St. Anne's and Packer went to Bank Street or went to similar schools to Bank Street. It's a little less radically progressive than it used to be. Worked there for about 11 years. I got hired away by somebody I knew from Bank Street because they were starting a progressive school called Brooklyn New School in the Board of Ed. And I helped found this progressive school, very multicultural, multiracial school. And I worked there for about 11 years, at which point my children were going to Brooklyn Friends and my wife was working in the preschool. Was actually at that point, eventually became the assistant head and the admissions person for the preschool. And so I got hired to basically teach 6th grade at Brooklyn Friends, and I taught 6th grade and 7th grade for another zillion years there. I mean, I've been working with kids since 1976.
Well, I think
it's now, yeah.
we're working with kids. When you're around kids, it keeps you young. It keeps you fresh.
Totally true. And we actually are both still very, very part-time at Brooklyn Friends after all these years.
Yeah, tell me what you do at Brooklyn Friends.
So what now I do at Brooklyn Friends is I do music with preschoolers, 1 session a week.
If you have friends, out-of-town visitors, or even visitors from other parts of the city, especially with your knowledge of the history of Brooklyn Heights, what are maybe 3 places that you would take someone to who may not be familiar with Brooklyn Heights?
Oh, well,
and everyone knows the promenade, right, and all that, which of course, you know, that it's an important spot, but yeah, I'd love your input on that.
My favorite place to take people the last few years is Brooklyn Bridge Park.
Yeah. Which
I think of as, I mean, it really is part of the Heights. It's
absolutely.
It's on the Heights.
Yeah.
I love Brooklyn Bridge Park. I love how clever the design is. I love seeing all the tourists there. I know a lot of people don't. I love seeing the kids playing basketball, who are terrific about 97% of the time. So Brooklyn Bridge Park, when my family from California is here, we come right to this park.
Yeah.
And I like just walking around I like walking around to the, which I guess is really the Southern Heights, the quiet little streets. Also the giant redwood.
Where's the giant redwood?
Which I only discovered walking around with Bonnie last year.
There's a giant redwood in Brooklyn Heights?
There's a giant redwood. It's inside a fence. There's actually a placard that describes it. It was a very rare tree that somebody brought seeds back from China. It's a Chinese redwood, and now it's more common, but there was one of 5. I think they're at the there may be one in the Botanic Gardens, and it's a really tall tree.
Oh my gosh! Well, I have my homework. I'm gonna go
I
check
did
out
not
this
know about
redwood.
that either.
Yeah.
It's right next to a really cool house that used to be a stable or a carriage house, that now, of course, is worth zillions of bucks.
Well, listen, Tony, I could talk to you all day. You've given us so much, and it's been such a pleasure chatting with you. Thank you
Well,
so much
thanks.
for joining
Thank
us.
you very much.
You.
It was nice to be asked.